Hi, I'm Dustin Abbott, and I'm here today to give you my standard review of the Sony FE 35mm F1.4 G Master lens. I'm filming on it at the moment on a Sony Alpha 1, which is the camera that I've used to run the test and the various images that will be shown throughout this review. Now, the 35mm F1.4 GM is a follow-up to the initial Sony Zeiss Distagon 35mm F1.4 that was one of the earlier lenses on the platform. That lens had a mixed reputation. Some found probably some sample variation because some found it to be very good, others found it rather disappointing. And of course there was some inconsistencies in autofocus performance. In many ways I think that Sony was still refining their process of lens design and autofocus design, and we've seen a lot of maturation since that point. The 35mm f1.4 GM lens solves basically all of those problems and manages to deliver a high-performing lens that is also very compact and lightweight relative to the competition. This lens weighs in at only 524 grams, and of course that is considerably less than the 630 grams that we saw for the Distagon lens, and lighter still than the Sigma 35mm f1.4 DN that I just reviewed, which is 640 grams. And so obviously having a lens that is lightweight and also shorter, it's 96 millimeters, and both the lenses that I've just mentioned, the Distagon and then the Sigma, were both right around 112 millimeters in length. And so you've got a lens that is significantly more compact and significantly lighter than competing lenses, while at the same time offering up a very high grade of build. This is a lens that has a lot of metals in the design. It is fully weather sealed, starting with a gasket at the lens mount, seal points at various places inside the barrel, around the switches, around the rings, and then of course it has a flooring coating on the front element that further helps to complete that weather sealing. It comes with a nice pouch. It comes with the lens hood that has a locking mechanism and also reverses nicely for storage. It has all of those little pro-grade touches that you would want. It also includes the diverse approach to aperture that is typical now, the standard for the GM lenses, and that you have an aperture ring where you can control aperture through either detents at 1/3 stops. You have a switch where you can click to declick the aperture, and so you can smoothly rack through it. You can also just put it into auto if you want to control it from within the camera. Beyond that, it has the other typical features like a focus hold button that can be programmed to different things and an AF/MF switch. The manual focus ring itself is, it has a good feel in some ways. I find that the weight is a little bit on the light side for me. I would like to have just a little bit more feel to it and a little bit heavier damping for slightly more precision focus. On the plus side, it is fully linear, and so that means you can get very repeatable results. 67mm front filter thread, which I love. It's very common, shared with a lot of other lenses. There are 11 rounded aperture blades inside, and I do have to point out that Sony does a better job with this aperture than just about any lens that I have seen for maintaining a circular shape with the aperture stopped down. It stays very, very circular for a long time, and so they've really done a great job with that. And you can see that while at f1.4 there is a little bit of that geometric, flattening, kind of a lemon shape in the corners, by f2 you have consistently circular shapes across the frame. And so that's probably your preferred aperture if that's really a priority for you. One of the other things that is worth pointing out is that this lens excels relative to other 35mm lenses when it comes to both the ability to get close up to your subject. You can focus down to just 25 centimeters, that's under 10 inches, and you have a very high 0.26 times magnification level. That is significantly better than what we just saw on the Sigma 35mm DN lens that had, not quite a 0.18 times magnification. It's also better than what the Distagon was, and even better than what the 35mm f1.8 lens was, which was a very good lens for that as well. But at its 0.24 times, it's not quite as high. But I would say that even more importantly, because there is minimal distortion, what I found is up close is I got a very flat plane of focus, which is quite surprising for a wider angle lens that you can get very close with. And so it's more useful than typical and provides a really high degree of performance at that minimum focus distance. And, so having both high magnification and good performance is fantastic. So overall on the build, very high marks and that kind of performance. I also give very high performance grades when it comes to the autofocus. It has dual linear motors that drive focus, so focus is very fast, it is very quiet, and it is highly accurate in my findings. And so as you can see in this segment, it tracked my eyes very smoothly. Not just did a good job of tracking the eyes, but as I move back and forth, there's very little kind of obvious focus changes. And so it allows that to be really smooth in transitions, which is better than usual. Beyond that, we can see as we look at the focus pulls that they are precise and extremely quiet in operation. Let's take a peek. So as you can see, very smooth in operation. As far as the sound goes, all you could hear was environmental sounds. There's basically no focus sounds to be heard. So high marks there. The only negative takeaway from this particular test is that you might have seen that there's some fairly obvious focus breathing, and that objects do change shape relative to where they are in the position of focus. So that's going to be an unfortunate downside for some of you that are very video focused and tend to do big focus pulls as a part of your video capture. Autofocus was also very sticky in terms of with stills, and what I mean by that is that even when I shot a little portrait session where I was shooting through new budding branches on this maple leaf, and so there's a lot of different layers that could grab focus, I found that as I moved around trying to get positions through the tree, that it stayed completely sticky on the eyes of my subject, and so knew that's where focus was going to be, and it never deviated from that. And so high marks for that. And of course, as we're filming here, I suspect you're going to find that it has been rock solid in terms of tracking my face, my eyes, and not pulsing back and forth and losing focus like that. So very strong performance on the autofocus front as well. Great news also when it comes to our optical performance. This is a lens that manages to pull off what I find to be a fairly rare combination, in that it is both highly corrected, and so it's going to deliver very, very sharp results even from f1.4 on, but it also manages to deliver a very soft bokeh quality. And so just interestingly, before we hit any of the details, what I found that most made it stand apart from the Sigma, which is an extremely sharp lens, and of course I just tested that lens and gave it very high marks for sharpness. While I find that the Sigma is probably just as sharp in the center of the frame, almost as sharp mid-frame, and just a little bit behind in the corners. And the difference though is that when I put the two shot things side by side, the Sony GM lens excels in that it's equally sharp, actually a hair better, but it delivers a much softer defocus, a smoother transition to defocus, less kind of busyness in the transition zone, less double lining or any of those distracting. But as you can see from this shot with the padlock, it just melts away to a creamy background in a way that the Sigma really can't quite match. And that is quite a rare combination to be able to get both of those aspects. In terms of the technical details, I found that it controlled longitudinal chromatic aberrations well, but not perfectly. And there was this shot, for example, shot at f1.4, where the plane of focus was actually beyond the this bare tree, and so you can see in the bare tree that there is some purple fringing there. That was the most extreme instance that I saw, but in a few very rare occasions I did see some longitudinal chromatic aberrations, which by the way probably contributes to the softer bokeh rendering, by the way. Also, lateral chromatic aberrations are basically non-existent. No, purple-green fringing on either side of the black and white transition areas. So that was very well controlled. Distortion, as I mentioned previously, is almost non-existent. I had to do a -1 correction because there's a tiny bit of pincushion distortion. I was surprised to see pincushion because typically you would see barrel in a wider angle lens, but it's very minimal and thus it's very easy to correct for and has very little damage to the image. Vignette is a little bit heavier. I had to use, I believe, a plus 57 or plus 65, somewhere in that range to correct for a vignette, wide open at f1.4 and slid the midpoint all the way over to the left. So there's about 2.5 stops of vignette in the extreme corners. However, it corrected fairly linearly, and so I don't think it's going to be a significant problem for anyone. As for other aspects of optical performance, I found that it was very flare resistant. Right now, Sony's coatings that they're using on their GM lenses are some of the best in the business, and they're just completely controlling flare. So great job there. Coma is very low instances, and so it's a great lens for shooting the night sky because you get good, sharp, crisp star points even at f1.4, and they're quite consistent across the frame, even towards the edges. There's a little bit of deformation, but it's minimal relative to most other lenses, particularly wide aperture lenses like this one. And so just a lot of great things across the frame. And so I found images had this beautiful, mixture of both great sharpness and then also really nice soft rendering. And so, just a great job, a great performance. And this is a lens that has few peers at the 35mm focal length and having both of those attributes coming together. So all told, this is a lens that is an easy one to recommend because it hits that kind of rare formula that Sony has managed to nail recently with some of their GM lenses, where it has a very high degree of build, great autofocus, amazing optical performance, but is also relatively small and compact. And in this case, you've also got what I feel is a reasonable price point at about $1,399 US. Now, that's not cheap, obviously, in an absolute sense, and there certainly are cheaper alternatives, most notably that Sigma that I just tested, you can get for about $500 less. However, if you're looking for the best 35mm lens available on Sony right now, there's no question that that is the 35mm f1.4 G Master. It just, in all of the little areas, it excels. And I think that if you are a professional photographer or you are someone that just is a discerning photographer and you love the 35mm focal length, it's an expensive lens, yes, but there have been many more expensive lenses at the 35mm focal length that are inferior lenses to this one. And so in many ways, I think that it is good value for money. And I appreciate the fact that Sony is pricing these new GM lenses kind of bucking the trend to where we've seen on the Canon side, unfortunately, that all of their new lens releases have been very, very expensive relative to the EF counterparts. This GM lens is actually cheaper than what the Distagon was when it came to market, and even cheaper than when Sony was making lenses for DSLRs A-mount. It's cheaper than what their 35mm f1.4 lens was then. So the trend is in the right direction. So kudos to Sony for a fantastic lens that comes highly recommended. I'm Dustin Abbott, and if you look in the description down below, you can find linkage to my full text review, also linkage to an image gallery. There are buying links there if you want to purchase one for yourself, linkage to check out my merch, lots of great options there. And of course, you can follow me on social media, become a patron, sign up for my newsletter, and if you haven't already, please click that subscribe button right here on YouTube. Be sure to ring that bell and get notification when new content drops. Thanks for watching. Have a great day, and let the light in.